Hello everybody, I'm Mickey and I'm an actor and a filmmaker, and on my YouTube I make video essays, I make vlogs, chat about creative process or kind of whatever I'm gravitating towards at that moment. Okay, let's get into today's topic. About a year ago I made my first video essay and it was about sort of the creative process and systems. The big thing that I talked about in that was how much I view how I make money as a part of my creative system. It can give or take away from how I'm able to be within that act. So with this video, I'm honestly going to be expanding a lot more about what I talked about in that, but it is more intended for really anyone in their 20s, creative or not, that is in probably particularly a corporate job that just doesn't feel quite right and like you just don't really feel aligned. I will say though, it can apply to small businesses or etc. It's more just like path creation and the existential nature of personal finance. You guys know me. I love the spiritual side of anything. For me personally, a lot of the quotes, resources that I'm gonna dive into are things that really help me make a decision about whether or not to leave a corporate job. As much as everybody does kind of talk about this stuff, sometimes we don't have great language to speak about it, and I found a lot of these resources to be very helpful with that. Up front, this video is not going to be get out of your job. I do really want to go into the possible benefits of staying, the possible ways to stay in a way that can be conducive to your work and your lifestyle and your values. Just know that both are on the table. And then a quick disclaimer, I think that finances are incredibly personal. There's a piece I read in research for this by Catherine Shannon called How to Make the Most of Your 20s. And in her words, I am not a lawyer, financial advisor, doctor, nutritionist, therapist, monk, or moral authority. Thankfully, I have no authority over you in any way. Okay, let's get set up. I usually take notes in a Google Doc. Titling this first section, I've got a bad feeling about this because there's sort of this moment when you're at a job when something starts to just feel a little off. Something's not adding up, something goes awry, somebody does something that makes you feel really uncomfortable. Sort of start to spiral. This is a piece by Alex McCann called The Death of the Corporate Job. He's speaking about people kind of realizing that they don't have a lot of effect. He says this: their job is basically elaborate performance art. They're human middleware between systems that could probably talk directly to each other. There's all these emails and these memos and these strategy decks and these meetings, and you sort of just start to realize it's not even that you're like a cog in the machine. It's like you are just existing in this sort of like performance of language and interaction. And at that point, you start to feel like you just have such minimal effect. He speaks about this a little bit more, but COVID contributed a lot to this. The pandemic pulled back the curtain for a moment. When everyone worked from home, it became obvious who was actually doing things and who was just there. Some people's entire roles evaporated when they couldn't physically attend meetings. Others discovered that they could do their full-time job in about 3 hours a day. Okay, so that's kind of like the first one, is the idea that maybe you have minimal effect. The second I would say is that the company, it depends what company you're at, but they are valuing politics over performance. There's this tweet from Sarah Guo: big companies tend to reward the best politicians, not performers. For me on a personal level, I noticed this once I started to have more interactions with higher levels. Also sort of saw who was promoted on that level was not always the people who were bringing the most market value, let's say. How much of that was actually personal life outside of work, even if it was minimal. What houses these people had, what types of vacations they went on, who they interacted with, were they friends outside of work, were they not friends outside of work. To see sort of like a company operating as if it is a friend group of middle school girls can be quite demoralizing when you realize this is what you're maybe supposed to be doing for the rest of your life. Working in a big company is basically an accelerated course in how power actually works. Once you see the sheer level of inefficiency, rent-seeking, and arbitrary decision-making, it kind of breaks all illusions about big companies. I found this on the depths of Wikipedia, and I always think about it in terms of corporate life. The Ben Franklin effect is a psychological phenomenon in which a person likes someone more after doing them a favor. I found that I did this a lot with my superiors. When I worked really hard for them, I liked them more. I think I had this relationship a lot with like higher up people that I only interacted with minimally. The third thing, and that I don't think is spoken about enough, I actually couldn't really find any resources that speak about this, is that I found working in a corporate environment that I was really thrown off by how working corporate kind of felt like college. These companies have campuses, they have a sort of like elevated cafeteria, There are company retreats, trips. You have quarterly or yearly meetings with your advisor to discuss your future. I think I thought that once you were out of school, those sort of structures and milestones were things that you had to create for yourself. And as much as the structure was really welcome, I didn't personally gel with it. I was like, I didn't like this in school. I didn't like being put in a box and told to go here and told to do this. It started to make me like quite uncomfortable. Also, when like workplaces have gyms or these added amenities, the perks are kind of start to add up like this like student discount modern corporate culture. It imitates the marketplace competitiveness of colleges. Like one has to have the best sports facilities, they have to have the best dining halls. So that made me kind of uncomfortable. Other people love it. For me, it wasn't great for me. I think when these things start to happen, you kind of start to spin a little bit. You are on social media a lot. If you're like scrolling on TikTok a lot, you're on Instagram, your algorithm will start to go a little crazy. And I say this in the way that I'm sure you'll get a lot of content around content that is confusing and that is telling you maybe to stay at your job and all these financial things you can do, or maybe to leave your job and you're like watching a travel influencer. Like I screenshotted this TikTok by Vanessa Dom's Life. She has a lot of like content around being a creative. The algorithm doesn't study your interests, it studies your fears about your interests. Think about that all the time, and especially when I start getting something like again and again and again that I don't really like or that I'm like not loving. I think when you are in a place of financial scarcity and you're at a job and you start to get this content, it can be really overwhelming, and also it can really capitalize on your fears. Even this video and in the way that it's packaged can be pushed on you, you know? I want to watch this one TikTok.
Hello, my name is Brayden, and today I'm going to be talking about the psychology of iced coffee, simulacra and simulacrum. Late-stage capitalism values something called a sign value. Iced coffee isn't just valued because it is caffeine. You're not buying a specific wake-up call, you're buying into the aesthetic of it. It's not just a drink to wake you up in the mornings, it's a drink that literally gives off the vibes. I'm young, I'm mature, I am of the working class. It's also interesting to see the parallels between how European coffee is evolved over time. It's more of an actual sign of leisure. You go to a cafe and you sit there for hours. You talk, people watch. All the seats are actually turned to face the street so you can watch people walk by. It's a sign of leisure. However, in America, it is a pillar of I am on the move, I'm working, I'm busy.
I love this video. I love the idea of sign value and sort of the obsession with being on the go, looking productive, being productive, even if that productivity actually means nothing. Presenting the appearance of being productive and employed and working means a lot more than the actual value of the work that you are doing. And I think this kind of goes back to like the you have minimal effect, you're just systems talking to each other. But I think the iced coffee theory, what I find kind of fun about it and what I did notice, you do start to notice sort of like sign values or levels of materialism that coworkers or people around you are buying into. It depends what level you are at. I feel like for the level I was at, it could be, you know, a fancy bag or a luxurious, you know, weekend getaway. And then for older people, I could tell it was like their second houses that they were buying. I think you do start to be a little bit disillusioned by the sign value. I just want to take a brief moment to talk about MUBI, who has kindly sponsored today's video, and share some film recs. If you watch my channel, you know I love film, and MUBI has such a great selection. MUBI is a curated streaming service that highlights cinema from all around the world, and they have this great mix of legendary auteurs as well as newer emerging voices. Every film on their platform is hand-selected by someone on their team, so it really feels like an intentional streaming service. Today, I'm going to be recommending THELMA, which is a 2017 supernatural thriller film by Joachim Trier of Worst Person in the World and Sentimental Value, two films I also love. THELMA tells the story of a sheltered religious young woman who discovers that she has a power that materializes when she feels desire for a female student at her university. I'm also very excited to recommend Good One. The film is a coming-of-age drama about a 17-year-old girl who goes on a backpacking trip in the Catskills with her father and his best friend, leading to a tense confrontation as she witnesses their strained friendship and her father's emotional limitations. You can try MUBI free for 30 days at mubi.com/MickeyGalvin. That's mubi.com/MickeyGalvin for a whole month of great cinema for free. So let's say you are kind of starting to notice all these things, you're starting to spiral, starting to crash out a little bit, but maybe it's only minimal. Maybe it's like just a little bit in the back of your head. Honestly, if I was like talking somebody through this, and I honestly have talked quite a lot of friends through it before, the next thing to really do is to identify the level of sacrifice you're giving to this job. I think that you are always paying for something in a type of currency. And that currency is not always money. The exchange that you are making for your job is very particular. It's your energy, your physical body, your health, your emotional well-being, your time. And it can get onto such an abstract level. I found a currency that I was exchanging at some of my jobs was I had to ignore some of my values. Like, I was physically exhausted from having to like push down certain thoughts or feelings that I had every day. And then I would watch others around me, and I could tell that even if I really respected their values as a person, they didn't have as much of an issue with that. Like, it just wasn't as physically exhausting for them. And I think that I ended up paying a higher price, and then the job wasn't worth the price for me anymore. And for them, it actually is and was, and I totally respect that. I just think it's important to start thinking about the types of currency that you are paying for your job with. When this started to unlock for me is when, honestly, I saw this TikTok. I also shared this video in a different video essay, so you can skip it if you want, but it's about pocket drain.
Something to keep in mind if you end up choosing a soul-sucking job with a higher salary is that, ironically, there's a scenario in which you end up having less money. So like, let's say you end up choosing a job where it pays 30% more, but you absolutely hate it. You dread every single minute of that job. Well, what happens a lot of times is those people come home, they do their drinks, their ganja, whatever it is, and then eventually they realize that is not even enough to counteract the depression they experience at work. So they turn to something like spending. People who are not even materialistic, who were very responsible about spending and saving in the past, all of a sudden they're like, I need something else. So they start spending. They start buying gadgets they don't use. They start buying food they don't eat and clothes they don't wear. And before you know it, the job that was paying 30% more means you actually have less saved because you're spending 45% more.
When you identify the things that you might be purchasing or spending money on that comes from more of a whole of like, I don't like my life, I don't align with my life, I don't enjoy this experience, it starts to also allow you to see materialism entirely very differently. As much as I can see someone do something that I might want or enjoy, I am always viewing that through a very different lens now. And now when I see people go on like an extravagant European vacation, as much as I love to go on a trip, like don't get me wrong, but I see them needing it so badly. It attracts me a lot less. And it's not to say that those things can't be really fulfilling to someone. It's just that it's one thing to put that judgment on someone that you don't know on the internet, but I do think it's another when you start actually noticing it in like friends and loved ones. And not in a bad way, not to judge them, but more just that something sort of clicks in your brain. Like, we do live in a world where we are looking at Instagram every day, and it's very intimidating, and everybody's showing us all this wealth, how amazing their life is. We see a highlight reel. And when you can like switch that in your brain, you're able to engage in life, I think, just from a much more grateful and present place. So I think on the subject of sacrifice, once you've kind of identified maybe what the currency you're paying is, I think you can kind of get a little bit more into the existential nature of your finances. This TikTok is quite long. I'm going to kind of summarize it for you guys. Basically, it says money is a tool to free yourself. Especially if you're American and you're watching this video. We have a responsibility to work and attain value so that we are actually literally not out on the street without food, without shelter. Our society does not have a safety net to keep people from being like that. But there's also many levels and nuances to it once you are like within the system, which there's no escaping it. Like I live in America. I'm within the system of it. What he says, I'm quoting him directly here, but he says most people spend, especially their 20s, accumulating wealth, even minimal wealth, but like accumulating money without asking, who am I? What do I value? What do I want? And what do I want my life to even look like? And we kind of just immediately believe that accumulating wealth will equal better life or lifestyle. Money itself is actually kind of like a neutral concept. Like, we see it as so evil, but it itself is just like an exchange of energy for goods. So he speaks a lot about this. He also talks about being really into the FIRE movement. And then he speaks later about how the sacrifice that would require of him doesn't equate to the ROI of retiring early. Like, he's like, looks at himself in the mirror and he's like, and if I think at best the S&P 500 can give me a 10% return year over year, I think I can do better than that. I think I personally, year over year, can give myself better than a 10% return. as an entrepreneur, as whatever he ended up doing. And that's a very particular experience of like a freelancer and entrepreneur, but I do think it still applies. He basically comes to the conclusion at the end that his current lifestyle might be worth more than the return on investment way down the line. And that's not to say to be financially irresponsible in the present, but I do think that there's this really interesting balance and sort of life design that comes along with when you use money as a tool. I'm going to get into this big decision of staying or leaving. Before we get there, I do think that if you're at like this point in your emotional process of deciding whether or not to leave a job, you probably are crashing out. There's just a big ego death that goes with it. Like there's just a huge kind of beautiful cycle. I just want to share some things because I am like, you're gonna be okay, even if it doesn't feel like it. It's also really lonely when you start realizing these things and when you don't have the language to discuss them with people, or you do have the language and you start saying things, people don't really want to hear it. I'm gonna be honest. Like when you sort of start to understand like how much choice you have in the matter, you personally, what choices you have within your current situation, and you share that with someone who wants to believe that they don't have a lot of choice, they're not going to respond that well. So within that context, we're gonna watch some things right now just to ground us. I like this one. Crashing out is okay when you realize it keeps your soul well-rounded. It's one of the most human things you can do. You're human maxing. I think a lot of times when people like watch a like video essay in this way, it's like, let me figure it out. Like, let me be better than other humans. Hating your job and deciding whether or not to leave is the most human maxing thing you can do.
No, dude, totally. Out of all 9 billion people, God chose you to suffer uniquely.
Last one.
So the way the universe works, it is going to present you with things that feel really, really difficult to face. And we can think about those things almost like a spiral, because these are themes in our life. They're not just like, we're looking at things not from an event perspective, but we're looking at them from a theme perspective. We come to this earth in order to experience certain themes and to move through certain life lessons. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, why can't I just freaking break through on this thing? Don't worry, we all have our own thing. This is exactly the way that the universe is designed. When we think of a spiral and these themes being repeated and repeated, we're moving away from the center of the spiral.
If you've been in a situation where like you keep entering new jobs and you keep expecting them to be better and you still are really unsatisfied with them, I think about this more as like this like spiral. And also this idea that life isn't linear. Move through these like spirals and portals and they take us to different places. Like it's honestly very circular in a lot of ways. And so I think it's easy when you realize that like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here or something's wrong with this job. It's really easy to feel behind or to look around and be like, oh, this person figured out that this works for them and I'm so behind, or I don't know what I'm doing, no matter what age you are. When you think of it more as that like you are being presented almost like a mirror, you're being presented with things that are not meant for you in order for you to identify more of who you are. Okay, that was our feel-good break. And now we're getting into the real gist, which is staying or going. I do think that once you've identified what money and finances means to you and what it can allow you and what you need and what you want your life to look like, you can then more accurately assess if the sacrifice level of the job is too high. And then you can decide whether you're going to stay or go. I'm going to talk about what staying and going looks like, and also how staying can be good and how you can make it work for you. This is in The Death of the Corporate Job. The moment you stop believing in corporate fiction is the moment you can start using it. Once you see it as an infrastructure rather than identity, as a resource rather than a calling, everything shifts. Your corporate role doesn't need to be meaningful, it needs to be useful. Useful for building skills, for funding your real projects, for buying time while you figure out what matters to you. I think this especially matters if you, like I said before, like all those things, like you're still working through that stuff, and that can take years. You also are able to, once you stop believing in the corporate fiction, you are able to then experiment with how you want to play and perform. Like it really is like you're an actor. You can have your corporate persona that works for you. Wherever you're at, a really important point is to identify what the company is rewarding. And this takes time to observe. When does someone get a promotion? When does someone get a raise? When does someone get that at your level, at the level above you, at the level above that? Does this align with you? Does this not align with you? Are there other places you can go where it does align with you? And that doesn't mean it needs to be like good. Like these places they're built for profit. I'm not saying that they're going to reward like kindness. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, if they reward something that makes you feel really, really, really icked out, then you probably gotta go. It's probably not gonna be that great, but you might be able to go somewhere else. So like, don't panic, you know? It's a little tricky, and why a lot of people leave like a year into a job. That's step one. Step two is like, am I okay performing what this company rewards? Because once you start playing into the corporate fiction, which can be totally fine and fun, are you okay to play that? And if playing that doesn't make you feel good, then it's a bit tricky. From my point of view, I had a job that I actually loved. I loved my coworkers. I loved my community, but I didn't really love what I needed to perform for the company to reward me. It made me really uncomfortable. And so it just didn't align in that way. A good question is, what amount is meaningful to you? This is another quote from Alex McCann, but a different piece. Most jobs aren't obviously meaningful or obviously meaningless. They sit somewhere in between, with sources of hollowness mixed in with sources of genuine purpose. And the mixture is precisely what makes that problem so hard to see clearly. You can spend years in a role that is 40% meaningful and 60% hollow because the meaningful parts are real, and you keep doubting your own dissatisfaction. A lot of jobs are not actually meaningful, but you can get meaning from your coworkers, the experience, the skills that you're building. But keeping an eye and keeping tabs on how, obviously you can't like quantify this, but that 40-60 I think is such a tipping point of when something is either sustainable or unsustainable. And that only really presents itself over time. So I'm quoting Alex McCann a lot here, but in this piece, what he kind of gets down to at the bottom is that because like the corporate structure is somewhat dead, most people are using it to both like fund and create their other parallel interests, whether that's other businesses or just like hobbies and such. What's emerging is something very interesting. People are building parallel systems of actual value while maintaining their corporate personas. I know developers who do their official job in the morning and build their own products in the afternoon, marketers who run their agencies from their corporate desks. I think though that the way he speaks about the parallel systems, he's talking about like monetary, like people building out of their businesses, but this is also how I view people who really excel in corporate life, who build such a full and amazing life outside. They go to a lot of events, they go on a lot of trips, they really enjoy life to the fullest because they know that they have to, you know, put on this mask and do this job. But if that cost isn't too high for them, they really are investing and putting a lot of work and effort into planning and connecting and networking and community. If you want to stay in a corporate job, like that is the path you need. You need that financial stability. Finding a job that complements whatever parallel system you want to take is like so, like I think that is kind of your path.
I'd say one of the strangest parts about growing up is realizing not everybody wants to be saved from the life that they're complaining about.
This statement kind of goes to literally if you're staying at your job, if you're going to the job, but like if you are doing so in a conscious manner, you are kind of signing up for the difficulties of the job. A lot of times people really want to complain at work just to complain. They want to let off steam, which is understandable, but the sort of energetic environment that creates can be really annoying, especially when you're someone who decides to stay at a job and create the best environment possible for yourself. Other people's negativity, especially when they have no interest in leaving the job, they just want to complain about it. It can be really difficult to negotiate, and so I think my advice there is try to steer clear or create boundaries around those coworkers. Okay, you're leaving your job. Let's talk through what that looks like. If you decide to leave and are able to, it is likely because you want to be freelance, you want to go about an artistic path, you want to take a sabbatical for however long that might be, or you just don't like working and you want to work as little as possible. I say as little as possible because I think unless you are an heiress, you know, you probably do need to work. So I basically think if you are choosing to leave, there are three main considerations that you're making just practically, which is your expenses, your healthcare, and your taxes. Maybe I'm missing one. Those are the biggest things about like not being tied to a company. And while these things are all very confusing, I have shed tears over them, they also have become, and I've realized, are way simpler than I thought that they were. I think that the barrier to entry sometimes of living a more fulfilled or self-driven or freelance lifestyle is sometimes just figuring the thing out and understanding how the system works or how the system doesn't work. I will say in the situations of like healthcare, there's been a lot of learning I've had to do just within the state of New York of like the system itself is quite flawed. The marketplace, the online platform itself is very weird and confusing and silly, and it's kind of crazy that I'm like making these big decisions based off of a website that seems like it's from 1992. I'm not saying it's not difficult or confusing, but there are resources available, and we do have the internet, and if it's really what you want, then you gotta focus in. I will also say on all this like freelance stuff, once you do it once, then you just kind of know how to do it. And that's for the rest of your life. If you leave your job, take a sabbatical, and have to do all these things, you then, if you go back to your job, you retain a certain level of freedom that you can then, you know, you can leave and still take care of yourself and provide. To note here are that this is like kind of brutal, but I saw this. It was like nobody warned me that I'd literally spend my 20s losing respect for practically everyone I've ever known. This is a little harsh, but I do think it's kind of true, especially if you do leave a job. It's kind of the complaining TikTok that we watched earlier for staying. People are not really able to relate to you in the same way as they were when you were like trapped in a system like they were. When you're outside, it can frustrate people, and that jealousy or feelings can lead to disconnect with others, and that's not your fault, and I think it's ultimately worth it if it's the path that you want. But I do just want to note, because I feel like that's something I didn't know before I left my job. I knew that I needed it and I wanted to be better, but I was a bit shocked at how it's very, very subtle. Like everyone is like kind and supportive on the front, but underneath you can feel when people don't quite like that you're doing something different, and that's okay. The other thing that comes into play here is I think you're going to be actually quite shocked at what loses value to you. Like when you don't have as much money, you're like, why would I get my nails done? Like it's just like, I just don't care. That's me personally. But maybe you love and you're not going to give that up. For me, something I realized in the times where I've left jobs and I haven't made as much money, is that I really value going to the theater, going to the movies, spending money on immersing myself in those experiences, especially when I have extra time. What I don't value as much, buying a lot of cocktails, but I have other friends that do that and love it and have a best night ever. And like that is important to them, and that's social and that community. And then something I think is really helpful is beginning to develop and identify what success means to you. I quoted this in my last wrap up. Michelle Lee has this great piece called My Career So Far that I think is great for any woman, especially anybody interested in fashion and sort of like what a career can look like. Success now means freedom to work on my own schedule and be curious and try things without the pressure of monetizing it. I read that and I was like, oh, that is what success means to me right now. Finding that definition of success was very satisfying for my emotional brain. Find your own, like that doesn't equal everybody. Okay, this is the last section of the video. I'm going to call it Thinking Ahead. I want to share a couple resources that have helped me think about future nature of work and also just the financial systems that we live in and kind of where they might be going. The first is going to be this video.
I'm not even going to hold your hand when I say this. All financial advice that you are receiving is meant for a different world. All financial advice that you have received from books, from TikTok, all of that built up financial advice was meant for the world we didn't get.
This video goes on, and I will say it gets a little, to me, the video takes it a little too far and possibly encourages like a level of financial irresponsibility that I am not trying to promote. But I think that the idea that most financial advice that you have received is just for a different reality. Like you can just look at how much things have changed in the US since the 1980s in terms of income inequality, in terms of the ability to, buy a house, all these things that we hear about all the time. The twists and turns that our world takes are always beyond what we think they're going to be. And I don't think that this means that you should go out and spend all your money and do whatever you want. But I do think that there is a happy medium, kind of what that guy was talking about before as well, within like, what is the lifestyle and the life that I want? And how can I prepare somewhat for the future? Everybody has a different balance, so take this with a grain of salt. Had so much fear around money and spending money and not having enough saved or needing to always make the safe choice. I think that if you're on the other end of that and you feel like you are spending all the time and all this stuff, like you gotta seek the advice that you need. I had to have this sort of reality check. Money is meant to be spent on a life that I want to have that's worth living. and I actually don't know what the world is going to look like in 20 years. So this video snapped me out of like any sort of like insane thinking I was having. The other thing that I wanted to share is this piece called The Thinking Class by Carlo Iacono. This piece is a little bit pro AI for my taste, I will say. Automation anxiety has been real for factory workers, logistics, retail, call center staff, drivers. Whole sectors have lived through the machine is coming for your job for generations. But the particular panic that presents itself as a civilizational crisis, the sudden philosophical grief over the end of thought, tends to be authored, amplified, and emotionally centered in the class that sells words and decisions. People who were rewarded for producing legible cognition and who built identities around that idea, that this cognition was both rare and holy. We are not worried about humanity in the abstract. We are worried about the collapse of a premium. There are elements of this essay that I disagree with. Like, I disagree with there is an end of thought happening with AI taking over, and it's really, really scary. However, I do think that the type of work that AI threatens within a lot of corporations, like, there's a little bit of an ego death needed there. There's a little bit of like I said earlier, when you realize that your job is elaborate performance art, or you are just sort of systems speaking to each other. I'm not saying like your job should be eradicated or anything like that. I'm just saying like there should be a little bit of an ego death there. Work is work. The work of a plumber is just as valuable as the work of this person at this company. Do you know what I mean? And I think we get these fancy degrees and then we have these fancy jobs and we put ourselves on this pedestal. And I've seen this too, where people are kind of like horrified by the idea. Like people who went to fancy schools are like just so shocked by the idea of someone, they know working as like a server or like working in a front desk. To me, like work is work. Like, I don't know, like the money aspect is a different question, but I am a thinker isn't just a job description. It's a status claim. It's a story about why my hours matter. It's an explanation for why my life has weight. Reading this piece gave me a larger and more expansive idea of work, and also the types of forms that work can take in my life, and that it doesn't always need to be this sort of like prestige thing. I think a lot of fear I felt from people in corporate environments was like, well, if I quit, I don't have this status claim of the upper class in some way. It's such a limited view of looking at the world, and it also, I think, speaks to how you view and treat other people who have other jobs than you. And it does kind of go back to what I was talking about earlier of like, I don't see this that way anymore because I think about things in terms of currency. I will just leave on a quick personal note. I didn't really give a disclaimer about like my background at the beginning, but if you've been watching for this long, like you're with me. I worked quite a variety of jobs as my quote day job. Most of my jobs have been in fashion, and I worked in corporate fashion for 3 years. And I loved so many elements of my job. I love my coworkers. I love being creative every day. It was actually so difficult for me to leave. It took me like 6 months to come to the decision. But through it, I kind of discovered so much about myself and what I value financially, emotionally, physically. And that process, I felt like such an ego death, but also so reborn after it, and has also just allowed me to be someone who's a freelancer who can approach things with a lot of confidence. And so I'm really grateful for like both experiences. Okay, I think that's all I have to say for now. I would love to hear anybody's thoughts, what you want other videos to be about. I've been posting more on Substack, which I'm shocked that I've made it happen, but I have, and so I'm gonna keep doing that if I can. I know you want other videos to be about this summer, probably vlog coming up, probably quarterly wrapped video coming up, other fun things. Enjoy your summer, enjoy the heat, cool off, jump in a body of water, feel free. I think that's it. Thank you so much for being here for this very long video. I am so grateful for your time and attention. It means the world to me, and I just am really loving doing this, and I'm really grateful for everybody who shows up and watches my videos. So thank you so much. Sending you guys all the love.